Okay, so we're all good. Okay, so looking at what is good seating. Good seating, which should facilitate movement to maximize function. So looking at a stable seating base from the pelvis to free up upper body and arms to do activities in sitting, reaching, and day-to-day activities. Seating can also help alleviate abnormal tone. So as we know with stroke, we often see high levels of spasticity, high tone as well as low tone, and good seating and a good seating setup can really help manage that tone and prevent or delay deformities such as contractures that we often see. So things like setting the leg rest foot hanger position, managing the height of the foot plates, looking at the type of armrest we use, as well as then looking at the cushions and the backrests. All there's huge decision making as part of that process to look at all of these factors to help manage that person's posture. We want to optimize their comfort, manage pressure care, and really think about the 24-hour positioning and what type of cushions we might be looking at. So ideally we're going to with our shortlist already after our assessment. Promoting and improving self-image and the confidence that comes with being able to make eye contact with somebody from a wheelchair and a good sitting position, and that leading on to enhancing quality of life and promoting independence. As we know as clinicians, that's important with good seating. And so what are the effects of bad seating? I'm sure you've all seen this in your experience as well, but unstable postures in seating systems can lead to pressure ulcers, significant pain and discomfort, and checking sensation is such a big part of seating to look at the sensation level of the client, and yeah, physically assessing skin as well, I think is really important if you can during the assessment. Bad seating can lead to increased spasticity because we're feeding into some of those bad habits in terms of positioning. Reduced upper limb function. If somebody is working really hard to sit upright, leaning heavily to one side, then we're not going to get that functional use in both hands to do the activities they want to do. There's a physio in Ireland who refers to physiological functioning in seating, and she talks a lot about the life box, and that brings in our core functions such as breathing and swallowing. And I think it's a really nice term to think about when you're looking at someone seating, to look at those core functions, and is their posture promoting breathing difficulties, swallowing difficulties because they're slumped over or their chin is tucked. So having a good scan of that when you're doing your assessment. Postural deformity and range of movement, again, we can optimize that through different seating, and some of the powered wheelchairs with some of the different power functions can really help that stretching, and you can work really jointly with the OT and physio to look at what your goals of seating are, if that is one of them. Preventing contractures, and then the impact of bad seating on your mood and self-image. If you're not sitting upright, you can't see people, you're uncomfortable and in pain. So in terms of the overall goals of seating, we're looking to promote function and comfort whilst protecting skin integrity and the overall physiological function. And the fundamentals of seating, so promoting good enough posture that promotes function. We're not going to aim, well, it's hard to aim for perfection, I think, with seating. There's going to be compromises somewhere. So if we can get it good enough, then I think we're doing well. Protecting the skin. So skin wins and pressure care is highly important in seating, and that's often when we might need to compromise on positioning to accommodate for pressure care. Looking at the physiological function, so again, thinking about the life box and the digestion and their positioning of their organs when they're in sitting. I've seen people in really unsuitable manual wheelchairs, and it's, as I'm sure you've seen in your practice as well, really uncomfortable when people are slumped over in their chairs, and not great for bowel movements, for digestion, for breathing, and for swallowing. So in terms of the MAT assessment that we do, so just to describe it briefly, it's a musculoskeletal examination of the client's range of movement, range of motion, joint flexibility, muscle length, and skeletal alignment. So looking at those fixed or flexible postures, if you're seeing clients with pelvic obliquities, rotations, determining is that a fixed posture or is it flexible. And with the mat evaluation, to do a thorough mat, ideally you're looking at somebody in their current seating system. If you can get access to a plinth, sitting on the edge of the plinth, ideally, so you have a firm base to assess from. And in supine as well, really the benefits of supine, then you can fully assess range of motion at the hip angle, hip, knee, ankle range, which is important then when you're thinking about the seating range that you're going to be setting. Whilst also in neurological conditions and stroke, you're looking at tone and spasticity, which muscle groups that's in and how we might need to manage that in the seating system. Just to give you an overview of the layout of the mat, looking at the pelvic positioning in terms of the pelvic tilt, whether somebody's in neutral tilt, posterior pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt. These are your observations from the assessment, whether you're noting any obliquity or rotation and noting whether that's fixed or flexible, because that will then determine what cushions and backrest you choose. The trunk position, whether you're noting any scoliosis, any particular kyphosis, lordosis, noting all of this information down, measuring hip angles where possible. If you've got a referral from a physio and they already have that information, great. But it's good to get the client into supine so you can really assess that leg position during your assessment. So we're looking at the current seating system, assessing posture, looking at areas of high pressure and shear. So on your observations, are you noting that they're leaning particularly to one side? If there's a pelvic obliquity, is there more force going down one side of their pelvis? And are you noticing shear or that sliding motion forward? If they're sitting in posterior pelvic tilt, is shear something you need to be concerned about when you're choosing your cushion or your seating system, whether recline tilt is something you need to consider? And what part of the posture is most concerning? So we mightn't be able to solve all of the issues with posture and positioning, but what are the priorities? We want to look at the length of time spent in this posture, and that goes back to our questions that we would ask around 24-hour positioning and really getting the client or their family to talk through what that 24-hour period looks like. It's not uncommon that somebody's spending 12 hours in their wheelchair or armchair during the day. Any history of pressure injuries, pressure concerns, any shearing that you're noting in terms of sliding, especially if we're seeing hoist slings being left in situ, taking note of any shearing or sliding. Physiological functioning issues. So going back to the life box, what are you observing from their posture positioning in terms of their swallow, their digestion, their breathing? And the functional implications, so what they need to be able to do from their wheelchair is a big consideration. So some of the postural deviations often seen, so are the posterior anterior pelvic tilt, pelvic obliquity and pelvic rotation, kyphotic spinal postures, hyperextension of the head and neck, often seen with extensor tone presentations, a lumbar lordosis, scoliosis, your hip abduction, adduction, and your windswept position of the legs. Also important to note if the hips are in internal or external rotation, if there's any prior spinal surgery or hip surgery, because that's something that you're not going to be able to change, and that's something then we'd need to accommodate in the seating system. So really important as part of the past medical history to note that, because if somebody's had rods and fitted in their spine and fused vertebra, then we know that there's not going to be much shift there in terms of our spinal position. Looking at ankle range as well is really important, because that's going to determine what foot plates we choose, the angle we set, what range can we achieve and what we can't, what we need to accommodate. So I wasn't sure presenting today if it was going to be clinicians or stroke survivors themselves. So yeah, some of the language is more clinical focused, some isn't, so a bit of a range. Just a visual here on pelvic obliquity to explain how that looks. So one hip sitting higher than the other, particularly looking at the ASIS position with your hands on assessing that, then you can help to determine where that pelvis is sitting. That's why it's really important to have a stable base, like a plinth surface, when you're looking at this. So this is is really showing the load that's going down through that IT. So posterior pelvic tilt, also known as sacral sitting, which we would see a lot of. And the picture on the right here is showing the accommodation. So if this is a fixed posterior pelvic tilt, then we need to accommodate that through the backrest that we choose, and some of the cushioning that we put in there to accommodate that lower back position, which is missing from the before photo. So scoliosis, thinking about the pressure through the seating system and where you might then look at lateral supports or pelvic obliquity cushions and backrests to try and accommodate that. And I'm not going to go into backrests and cushions, and that's a whole other kind of topic, but just to be aware that there is a lot out there on the market to accommodate these postures. I think it's quite interesting to look at the weight distribution during sitting. That 75% is going through the buttocks and thighs, and 19% is actually going through the feet, 4% through the back, 2% through the arms. So if you're seeing clients without foot plates on their wheelchair, noting that 19% of the weight goes through your feet, then that weight distribution is going to be shifted and that weight is going to be going through somewhere else. So demonstrating the importance of having foot plates fitted correctly, that feet are making contact. And yeah, a huge amount going through the buttocks and thighs. So the importance of a good cushion for that. Just wanted to clarify the difference between tilt and space versus recline, because I see a lot of clients who are positioned in recline, and that negatively is impacting on their positioning. So I think determining this with clients, families, other staff is really important. So just clarifying that tilt is used to describe the change in the orientation of the whole seating system, and the posture of the person should remain the same throughout the orientation of the seat. So looking at the pictures there, your seat angle is kept with tilt in space, whereas with recline, you're opening the backrest angle. And I think the issues that we often see with recline is that when you open the backrest angle, it can push the bottom forward and can cause somebody to be sliding forward and sliding out towards the front of the chair, which is what we see a lot. So I think, yeah, just checking that recline angle if that's something you're also seeing. So the benefit of tilt and space wheelchairs, they can improve posture because gravity is eliminated when you're tilting back. Tone management, so extensor or flexor tone, you can manage that in tilt and space wheelchairs, either closing or opening the angle depending on what you need to do for the specific presentation. Improving physiological functioning, so thinking again about that life box, by having somebody in tilt, it can really help with that sitting position and that swallow positioning and digestion, rather than having to sit forward. It really can bring people back and enable them to have contact with the backrest. Redistribute and relieve pressure. So we're looking at 45 degrees of tilt for it to be therapeutic and pressure relieving. That is quite a lot. If somebody can tolerate 45 degrees, and obviously less, but some recline can actually help as well offload the pressure onto the backrest. So they need to be tilting a fair way back to be offloading that pressure. Tilt and space wheelchairs also can provide rest, because it's hard work for a lot of clients to sit upright. So having that balance between some tilt and some more upright sitting position for eating, drinking, activities, etc. is important, and improving comfort. So a wide range of powered wheelchairs out there on the market, a lot of benefits to them in terms of efficient mobility, pressure relief, so you can achieve that tilt position at 45 degrees in these powered wheelchair seating systems. Can greatly improve the posture and comfort for individuals, help manage tone. Again, looking at the life box and that physiological functioning, by eliminating some gravity and having someone tilted, can really open up their chest position and help with breathing and swallowing and digestion, whilst also helping with blood pressure. So lots of powered wheelchairs out there on the market, and I think I just wanted to highlight as well, especially if there was clients out there listening today, was to differentiate between the different types of powered wheelchairs and why you might choose some over the other. So in terms of front wheel drive and mid wheel drive, they're the main two I think that we see. I think we're seeing less rear wheel drives out there. But why you would choose a front wheel over a mid wheel? The front wheel drives are good at climbing, managing obstacles, more so than the mid wheel and the rear wheel, because you haven't got those front casters which are hitting the gutters first. You're climbing with the bigger wheels at the front. With a front wheel, you can also get closer to worktops because you haven't got the front two casters to manage as well. So yeah, good at climbing, good at managing obstacles, good for outdoor use if that's the priority of seating goals for the client. Mid-wheel drive, usually easier to pick up in terms of driving, learning how to drive because of the drive angle. Small turning radius with a mid-wheel drive, because you can operate the turning circle is on the spot. So it's a small footprint, and so a lot of people go for the mid-wheel drives. The rear wheel drives offer stability and also good at climbing, so outdoor use as well. I'm going to check if I'm missing anything on the rear wheel drive. More stable and can perform well at high speeds, but generally we're seeing more of the front and rear mid-wheel being scripted. I just want to touch on manual wheelchairs and the active users that we see. So the ergonomic recommendations include minimizing the stroke frequency of the push, minimizing the forces generated during propulsion, and minimizing extreme or potentially injurious positions. So we want to reduce the number of pushes per stroke, the amount of force that's going through the push, and the position. We want to optimize the position that somebody's pushing from. So ideally, we want to support the ergonomic posture within their manual wheelchair. We want to decrease the force that's required to push the wheelchair and reduce the stroke numbers. So the mnemonic here, Hasapawa, is often used by Amy Bjornson, who's the physio seating specialist at Sunrise Medical, and she refers to head over shoulders, over pelvis, over the axle of the wheel. So getting that straight alignment so you have good contact with the push rims. So the larger wheel, then obviously with the wheelchair configuration, you can decide where that's set. If it's too far back, so that's putting a lot more pressure on the shoulders for the push. However, it's more stable at the back. As you bring it forward, it's less stable, and as someone becomes more proficient in their manual wheelchair skills, you can do that. And then you're getting a more efficient push. So I wanted just to highlight this, that the effect of manual wheelchair users of pushing on their shoulder, and just to highlight that's something that we should be looking at with our active users and asking about shoulder pain and thinking about that. with our prescriptions as well. So just to highlight, during propulsion, so at the start of the push, the arms held in about 70 degrees of abduction. At the beginning of the push phase, the shoulders extended and internally rotated, whereas then pushing through the recovery phase, we're in more shoulder flexion and external rotation. So how that impacts is that we're ending up with well-developed flexors, internal rotators, and adductors, and then we're getting weakness around the back, around the scapular, thoracic-scapular muscles, and our external rotators, which can in turn lead to rotator cuff tears, bursitis, and other microtraumas. I think that's important to realize from a physical rehab perspective as well, that if there are active manual wheelchair users, that maintaining good shoulder functioning is going to be a key focus as well. So thinking about the rotator cuff as being very important in terms of the pushing. The push phase muscles are more concerning than the recovery phase muscles because the shoulders are positioned in adduction, internal rotation, and that co-contraction in the transition phase, so from the push to the relaxation phase, and getting that as smooth as possible with the least amount of force possible and with as few strokes to get for the given distance that somebody needs to travel. So in terms of how we can manage that, looking at somebody's sitting posture and seating system, which will come into our obviously assessment, the wheelchair configuration, where that rear wheel is set up. Using our physiotherapist and exercise physiologist to look at a strengthening and stretching program for the shoulder. As part of OT, looking at propulsion training and outdoor manual wheelchair skills to look at a good push. And then considering compensation and joint protection and whether we need to consider power assist, power add-on devices. And in terms of NDIS reports as well, that joint protection will be a big factor if somebody's got shoulder pain, and that's why you're looking at a power assist feature for their wheelchair. There's outcome measures and a number of kind of justifications that you can link to the shoulder pain, and that's a good reason to ask for power assist if needed. So lots out there at the moment on the market in terms of different power add-on, power assist devices. Power add-on being examples like the joystick or the smart drive, where it can actually, that power feature can take on the control of the whole wheelchair, whereas the power assist, things like the emotion wheels, can assist somebody to push. And then you've got some of the clip-on e-bikes like the Klaxon bike, which can be used outdoors for more off-roading. So lots out there, and that comes back to the screening in terms of knowing what to go for. There'll be a range of questions as part of the assessment to go through in terms of what are their goals, where the client wants to travel to, the distance, the terrain, whether it's quite hilly, whether if it's more bushwalk terrain, whether it needs to be taken on public transport and how portable it needs to be, or whether it's going in the boot of the car. The pain cycle, and if you're looking at power assist or power add-on from a shoulder management point of view, really delving into the pain and what the triggers are for that. And just to touch on the 24-hour positioning as well, and our role within that, separate to the wheelchair or the armchair seating, and thinking about what other equipment is out there on the market that can support people to offload pressure and to manage postures in lying. Just a few questions I wanted to think about today. Again, I wasn't quite sure of who the audience would be, but can I sit on the hoist sling during the day whilst in the wheelchair? So as we know, sitting on the sling can increase pressure and increase shear forces in the chair, so we don't recommend that it's left in situ. I did just want to mention that the all-day sling and the power silk sling, that if it has to be left in situ, that might be one to consider from a manual handling perspective. How can I effectively reposition in the wheelchair? So ideally, the individual themselves can do that in terms of leaning forward, putting weight through the foot plates, using armrests to push themselves back. But if they can't do that themselves, really advising staff or family members to use the tilt function to support repositioning bottom right back into the chair. In terms of the ARC seating referrals, I just wanted to touch on that. So in terms of making a referral here for a client to have a seating assessment, that can be done online via the website on ARC, and then the referral goes to our referrals coordinator, Natalie, and then it gets allocated within the team. Ideally, we complete the seating assessment in clinic here. Because we've got the equipment and we've got the access to the plinth and the hoist and everything, we can identify those postures and positions much easier from that plinth base rather than at home. However, we do see people at home a lot, so that's still an option if it needs to be. And we usually recommend 10 hours for a full seating assessment and prescription. That's for NDIS clients because we're looking at the report writing hours within that. So we're looking at about 2 hours for a posture assessment, about 2 hours for a wheelchair trial, and then that may be one trial or it may require a second, and then report writing hours and some non-face-to-face time in terms of communication with suppliers and things like that. For a private client or somebody looking at wheelchair prescription through an insurance company, it would be less because we're not needing the detailed report linked to that. How long do wheelchairs usually last before replacement is needed? I mean, a lot of people find that 5 years is the time period that they usually need to start looking at something new. That's not obviously set in stone. Some people can be sooner, some people they can last longer than that, but often people, that's the kind of time frame that's usually expected that they would last for. And in terms of how often people should be having a seating review, I would say at least every 12 months. But if their condition is changing, if they've any secondary diagnoses to stroke, and like a deteriorating neurological condition, recommend more often than that because they may require slight changes to their seating system during that time. Okay, so I just wanted to touch base with you guys, I guess, and see if there's any particular questions coming out of that. I know it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the seating. The other thing I'd recommend in terms of seating courses are the Sunrise Medical courses. On their website, they have a range of webinars that you can log into somewhere at lunchtime, and other clinical courses are free as well. Really good, highly recommend them if you've got the time, especially now that we're probably doing a bit less face-to-face. They're a really good resource to use. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to ask?
All good, thank you.
All good, okay. Thanks, Rachel. Was this kind of information people are kind of already familiar with in clinical practice anyway? Rachel, do you do a lot of seating in your role?
I haven't had to do a lot, but in my current role, now that I'm doing NDIS work, it's, the expectation will be a lot more. So really great to get the background, and I've done a few webinars and courses and things now. So it's just a matter of putting it into practice as the clients start to, come my way.
Yeah. Well, I found the team at Sunrise, the seating specialists there, the OTs, really good. So if you had any questions, taking photos during your assessments, and then you know, liaising with them as a point of call, I think that's been really helpful.
No, fantastic. That's good to know. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for joining, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that.
No problem. Thanks. Bye.